Hi, I'm Paul Peterson.
I'm Chris Sun Liu. This is our lecture on the presidency. We're going to kick it off by talking about the soft powers. Professor Peterson, we know that the president has some powers and that many of these are actually checked by Congress. What is a good way to think about this relationship?
Richard Neustadt, the professor at Harvard for many years, said this is not a government of separated powers. This is a government of separated institutions which share power. So it's the sharing of powers between Congress and the president that's important for understanding the American political system.
What did Neustadt argue was the result of the president and Congress sharing power?
Well, he thought we had a weak president. He would love to quote Harry Truman as saying, "Oh, when Eisenhower becomes president, he's not going to find it anything like the military. He'll sit here and he'll say, do this, do that, and nothing will happen. Poor Ike. It won't be a bit like the Army. He'll find it very frustrating." And then Neustadt also remembers the words of Teddy Roosevelt, who said, "If I only could be president, and Congress too, for just 10 minutes, even Teddy Roosevelt was frustrated by Congress." So Neustadt concludes that presidents are not powerful, they're weak. By virtue of the fact that they have to share power with Congress, presidents are forced to sneak around Washington, not march around Washington in hobnailed boots.
Is Professor Neustadt's claim that we have weak presidents in the U.S. still correct today?
Well, it's not quite as true today as it was when he wrote those words back when Eisenhower was president. Since then, the power of the presidency has expanded considerably. Both the president's soft powers and his hard powers are more useful to the president than ever before.
Soft powers, that's the name of this part of the lecture. But what do you mean by soft powers of the presidency?
Well, the soft powers are the ones that give the president the power to persuade. They don't guarantee anything. The hard powers give the president the power to act. We'll be talking about the hard powers in the next part of this lecture.
Can you give me an example of a soft power?
Well, the best example of the soft power is where the Constitution says that the president shall, from time to time, give to the Congress information of the state of the Union. In other words, the president has the power to tell Congress how things are going. Well, that doesn't sound like much of a power. That's a pretty soft power. That's just the power to inform.
How then does the president turn this into a significant power?
Well, it gives him the power to give speeches. And presidents originally did not give speeches. It was thought to be undesirable. George Washington often said only 2 words when he spoke: "Thank you." And he didn't say that very often. Hardly any speeches are given by George Washington. And that is the pattern that continues down to the Civil War. And the reason for it was pretty obvious. The president was the symbol of unity in the country, and the president dare not speak on very many issues, because if he does, the slavery issue is bound to come up, and the president will have to address that issue too. And that's the one thing that everybody agreed you could not talk about. But after the Civil War, presidents begin to give more speeches. And then as we come into the 20th century, it ratchets up higher and higher, almost with every single president.
What is a good illustration, a good example of the fact that in the past, the presidential power of speech-making was much more limited than it is today?
Well, right after Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, Andrew Johnson came into office, and he tried to use speeches to strengthen his power vis-a-vis Congress. And he did it to such an extent that one of the charges brought against him when he was impeached by the U.S. House of Representatives, he was never convicted by the Senate, but he was impeached by the House in 1868. And one of the bills of indictment said Andrew Johnson, President of the United States, unmindful of the high duties of his office and the dignity and propriety thereof, did deliver with a loud voice certain intemperate, inflammatory, and scandalous harangues, and did therein utter loud threats and bitter menaces against Congress. Of course, today, every single president of the United States would probably be impeached if that rule were applied to them in the way it was applied to Andrew Johnson.
And who was the president who did the most to change this historically weak power of speech of the president?
Well, we attribute the change mainly to Teddy Roosevelt because he was the one who invented the term the bully pulpit. We don't know what those words mean. It means something like bullying your friends, and it means something like using the pulpit to preach. And so some combination thereof is what was probably on Teddy Roosevelt's mind when he coined this term, the bully pulpit, that he used all the time to try to get his way. So ever since, political scientists have talked about the power of the bully pulpit, the fact that the president can use his speeches to force other people to do what the president wants. Now, other presidents have added to that. Franklin Delano Roosevelt used his fireside chats to the nation to help sell the New Deal. He greatly expanded the speech-making power of the president. And the other classic example is Ronald Reagan, who not only went on TV, he knew how to go on TV. He was an actor. He was a performer. He believed that every speech was a new opportunity to perform, and so he loved to do it. And he was very effective at communicating to a large audience. So some presidents have greatly enlarged the speech-making power or the information power of the presidency.
Are there limitations on the information power of the president?
Well, you got to be popular. If you lose the support of the country, those speeches aren't going to do you much good. And you've got to have a media that will support you. Once the media starts making fun of your speeches, then your speeches are not going to do you much good. And George Bush discovered that towards the end of his administration. And in the current period, 2014, there are signs that Obama's ability to make speeches has definitely eroded.
Information power is important, but it's somewhat vague and nebulous. What else can the president do?
Well, he can make recommendations to Congress. Now, this is another one of those soft powers. The Constitution says the president may recommend to Congress for their consideration such measures as he shall judge necessary and expedient. But of course, that power can be checked by Congress. Only Congress can enact the measure into law. All the president can do is recommend it. And recommending to Congress that they should do something is a pretty soft power. It doesn't give you much clout.
When during a president's time in office is the power of initiative at its height?
Well, right away, as soon as the president comes into office, and it was Franklin Delano Roosevelt who used that power most effectively. At the end of 100 days, he had recommended dozens and dozens of measures to Congress, and he had seen Congress act favorably on nearly every one of them. So the 100 days, the first 100 days of a presidency, are often thought to be the most momentous days, and everybody since Roosevelt has tried to live up to the Roosevelt record, and of course everybody has failed. That was only possible because of the Great Depression and the eagerness of the public to see that something be done about it. But other presidents have been able to do a lot right away. And one example is Ronald Reagan, who restructured the budget and got major cuts in domestic spending and big increases in defense spending and lots of regulations removed from the books, all within his first 100 days. And President Obama was able to do the same thing. When he came into office, he passed $1 trillion stimulus package that greatly expanded the role of the federal government. and many people felt did a lot to ameliorate the recession in which the country was undergoing. So yes, presidents are able to use that power of initiative in those first 100 days.
Are there any potential downsides to having such strong power of initiative during this transition and honeymoon period?
Presidents are prone to error during this period of time. So, for example, President Kennedy called for an invasion of Cuba, and when the CIA mounted the invasion with inadequate support, it was a total disaster at the Bay of Pigs. Another example is Bill Clinton, who made a statement saying that he would issue an executive order allowing gays to participate in the military. And he didn't need to do that so quickly. He needed to prepare the ground, to have a presidential commission look into it. But instead, he just said it the day after he was elected, and all of a sudden, he had a firestorm that he had to deal with, and he never did accomplish that task. And President Obama, too, had his difficulties moving forward so quickly on the health care bill when a more considered longer-term approach might have gathered wider support. So presidents, when they have a lot of power, that's when they don't have much experience. And when they have a lot of experience, that's when they don't have much power. That's the irony.
In the next part, we'll discuss the president's hard powers.